It's happening. Signs of the last days prophecies are happening just as Bible prophecy foretold, revealing. We are nearing the end of this age of grace and the appearance of Jesus Christ for his church. Thank you for being a part of this wonderful Last Days Church community here on this ministry channel of Signs of the Last Days. And thanks to all of you who are supporting this Signs of the Last Days ministry with your prayers and with your offerings. You praying and you giving is what supports this ministry to continue. The new Israeli Prime Minister, Naphtali Bennett, has just made a move for a change to the status quo in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount. And I'm sorry, but we're getting a notice here that there's a problem with our live stream coming through. So let us check here just for a moment and to see what may be happening here. It seems here that on our, I don't know if we're coming through to you or not, community, but here on our end, things seem to be jammed up and stopped, but we're going to look and see if we can get things moving again. Coming through okay? I hope that we're coming through okay. I don't know what happened. Technology's technology, right? And this time it seems like everything here in our studio is working okay. But as far as on YouTube, let's also check our multicast. Okay, our multicaster shows it coming through okay. But for some reason, our YouTube status shows not to be working. But at any rate, technology's technology. Even YouTube sometimes doesn't work correctly. But we're going to trust that we're coming through okay. And we're going to continue with this live stream. And here in the studio, if you see that it's not working, please let us know, okay? The new Israeli Prime Minister, Naphtali Bennett, has just made a move for a change to the status quo in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount, where this week he said that both Jews and Muslims have freedom of worship on the Temple Mount, with Bennett firing a shot that was heard around the world, that a change in policy is coming at the most contentious holy site in the world, which is at Jerusalem, Israel. This past Sunday during Tisha B'Av, as Jews were preparing to ascend the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to pray, there were initially protests by Arabs at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but Prime Minister Bennett, after holding security consultations with his internal security minister and Israeli police chief, Bennett, in an official statement released by the Prime Minister's office, Bennett instructed that the orderly and safe ascent of Jews to the Temple Mount should continue while order is maintained at the site. And then more than 1,600 Jews ascended the Temple Mount and prayed and sang there. And then Bennett, as was widely reported in Israeli media, he thanked the public security minister and the Israeli police chief for managing the events on the Temple Mount with responsibility and consideration. And in that statement released by the Prime Minister's office, where Bennett was saying Then Bennett also said that he appreciated them doing that with responsibility and consideration while also maintaining freedom of worship for Jews on the Temple Mount. That is exactly what the Prime Minister of Israel said. He said that he appreciated the security officials maintaining freedom of worship for Jews on the Temple Mount. Bennett said that Israeli security were maintaining the freedom of worship for Jews on the Temple Mount. This is huge, folks. And then Bennett also said that freedom of worship on the Temple Mount will be fully preserved for Muslims as well. This is amazing and so prophetic as a sign of the last days prophecies. What Bennett said was truly a prophetic shot that was reverberating throughout the Middle East, and we're going to share with you how that was the case. It was a shot heard throughout the Middle East and around the world that a change in policy is desired that will change the status quo at the most contentious holy site in Israel and the world. And this change in the status quo in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount is already underway in the process of happening, as we have just watched this week on Tisha B'Av, as Jews were going to the Temple Mount and praying, while the Israeli security police turned a blind eye. And this change in the status quo that Bennett stated is exactly what the prophecies foretell will happen, so that the end-time prophecies are fulfilled. The end-time prophecies foretell, and we shared this with you in our last live stream this past Tuesday night, the end-time prophecies that we enumerated there of Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 11. The end-time prophecies foretell that through Jerusalem, that through a last days Jewish temple, that through that the end time will come of the last final week of 7 years of the final tribulation wrath upon Israel and the world. Now, the status quo on the Temple Mount began at the culmination of the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arabs in 1967, in which Israel took back all of Jerusalem. And at that time, Israel's 55th Paratroopers Brigade Commander, Lieutenant General Mordecai Ger, he announced that the Temple Mount is in our hands. And at that time, the chief rabbi of the Israeli army, Rabbi Goren, there at the Temple Mount at that time, he pressed General Uzi, the commander of the Israeli troops in Jerusalem. He pressed him to take dynamite and to blow up the mosque on the Temple Mount, as the rabbi said that we may rid ourselves of it once and for all. But the Israeli general refused. But the rabbi was undeterred, as the rabbi persisted, saying, Uzi, you'll go down in history if you do this. That's what Rabbi Goren told him. He said, you don't realize what tremendous significance this would have. And then the Israeli general responded, saying, Rabbi, if you don't stop, I'll take you to jail. But then, it was less than 2 weeks later, the Israeli Defense Minister at that time, Moshe Dayan, and other Israeli leaders met with Muslim religious leaders atop the Temple Mount, where they reached an agreement of the status quo, where the overall security of the Temple Mount compound is under Israeli control and supervision, while the Muslim Waqf, under Jordan's leadership, would continue to have religious responsibility for the compound. And prayer on the Mount, according to this status quo, agreed to in 67, prayer on the Mount would be reserved for Muslims only, while Jews would be allowed to visit but not to pray there. As a defense minister of the revived Jewish state at that time, who had just regained their holy city and Temple Mount, promptly relinquished the Jews' right to practice their religion there as they had in biblical history on the Temple Mount. And that status quo, agreed to in 1967, has continued. Netanyahu, the previous longtime prime minister of Israel, always assured the Arabs and Muslims specifically that Israel would not allow Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. Netanyahu's statement to them was that Israel will continue to enforce its long-standing policy of the status quo, that Muslims pray on the Temple Mount, but non-Muslims, of course being Jews, only visit the Temple Mount. But now, the new Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, has made the statements thanking Israeli security for maintaining freedom of worship on the Temple Mount fully for both Jews and Muslims. That statement was an official statement from the Prime Minister's office that was released in both English and Hebrew. And after the statement was released, there was hysteria this week that broke out in Israel, both in Israeli media and in Jewish politics, as they were incredulous that Bennett had actually said that. Because they all realized that allowing Jewish prayers to take place atop the Temple Mount marked a major change to the status quo. The status quo that had existed at the holy site since the Jewish state recaptured the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount from Jordan during the 1967 Six-Day War, as I described. After Bennett's statement this week indicating a change in the status quo, the Times of Israel immediately came out with an opinion article saying that Bennett was playing with fire and putting Israel at risk. And the Arabs and the Muslims, they went into a rage over Bennett's protection and support of the Jews ascending the Temple Mount and praying there. Jordan, Turkey, and Egypt all reacted angrily to the news, with Jordan saying that the Israeli actions against the mosque are rejected and condemned, and that they represent a violation of the historical and legal status quo and international law. And the Arab and Muslim world also began to propagate lies concerning what happened. For example, a Kuwaiti news agency said that 23 groups of Jewish extremists or settlers had stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and desecrated the mosque, which that was a lie. And Turkey's President Erdogan also said that Israeli forces had violated the sanctity of the Haram al-Sharif once again by allowing racist Jewish groups to raid Al-Aqsa Mosque, with him also telling the lie. As well, there was the propaganda by Iran and its proxies as Hezbollah and Hamas condemning and threatening Israel as they endeavored to whip a frenzy into the Palestinian street. But also, the Islamist Ra'am Party, which is a member of Bennett's governing coalition in Israel, they also condemned the ascent of what they said were hundreds of Jewish settlers to the Temple Mount, with them saying that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is solely the property of Muslims and that no one else has any right to it, the party said. And then they warned that these events may result into inflaming the situation in Jerusalem and the entire Middle East, leading to a catastrophic religious war. Then the Israeli politics swooped in, with all of the politicals saying that it was all just a mistake in wording. Spokespeople for other Israeli offices in Israel, as that of the foreign minister, Yair Lapid, who is the secular leftist, who is the partner of the government coalition with Bennett. And then also the public security minister office. Spokespeople for these offices, they put out statements saying that Prime Minister Bennett's wording was just off. And there was a report by the Times of Israel that Bennett was backpedaling from the statements of a change in the status quo, with the Times of Israel article saying that, quote, unnamed officials, unquote, who they went on to say were also not authorized to speak publicly and demanded anonymity. They said that these unnamed officials were saying also that Bennett just had a mix-up in his wording. But what's very interesting, during all this time, as there was all of this Israeli hysteria in the media and in the politicals, what was very interesting, and I read dozens of articles on this during these past few days, checking and looking, the entire time the Israeli Prime Minister Bennett remained absolutely silent. He said nothing. His only remarks were his original remarks that they were maintaining freedom of worship for the Jews on the Temple Mount along with the Muslims. And after those statements by Bennett on the change to the Temple Mount status quo, and despite these so-called unnamed officials' comments, Bennett himself did not retract his original statements. He did not change his statements. He did not even attempt to clarify his statements. He said nothing other than what he had already said, indicating a change in the status quo. His statements remained just as he released them, that he instructed the orderly and safe ascent of Jews to the Temple Mount, that should continue, and he thanked security for maintaining freedom of worship for Jews on the Temple Mount along with the Muslims. Folks, this was not some mistake by Bennett. This was not some mix-up where he got his words mixed up. Bennett is not a dummy, nor is he an Israeli political neophyte. Excuse me. Nor is he an Israeli political neophyte. Bennett was an elite commando in the Israeli military. He's also a successful entrepreneur, so successful that he is a millionaire. And he was also trained in Israeli politics by none other than the old political fox, Netanyahu himself, where Bennett served in Netanyahu's prime minister office as his chief liaison and political officer. Bennett also previously served in the Israeli government as Minister for Defense, also the Minister for the Economy and Education. Bennett's no dummy. Bennett knows what he's doing. Bennett knew exactly what he was saying, and he knew exactly what it implied in regards to the status quo at the Temple Mount. And he did it purposely, because Bennett wants to change the status quo at the Temple Mount to where Jews have the same rights to a Jewish temple and Jewish worship on the Temple Mount as the Arabs and Muslims have with their mosque. We warned 6 months before Bennett became Israeli Prime Minister in a live stream on January 3rd, 2021, where we called him out as emerging as a leader for Israel. And we warned then, and again we warned just 2 months ago, that Bennett would push for a Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And now, this week, Bennett just made his first pass at changing the status quo at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The reason he did this is just as we warned before, that Bennett is the first ever kippah-wearing, observant Orthodox Jew to ever be Israel's prime minister. And we told you that Bennett believes that the time has come now for the Jewish temple to rise again in Jerusalem. He said so. Bennett said so himself. When Bennett visited and spoke at a Jewish seminary in Israel back in February of 2020, we captured that. We saw that. And in his speech, Bennett said that Israel is now living in the era of the third Jewish temple. Bennett has said that it is time for the Jewish temple. We warned 2 years ago, before the first election in the series of elections that Israel has just had in the past 2 years. We warned in a live stream titled Israeli Election Surprises Lead to Temple Miracle. We said that there would be surprises in Israel's election leading to a new government with new attitudes that would move toward the last days temple. And it is happening. As we have just seen this past Sunday, and then the reverberations Monday and Tuesday in Israel and the Middle East, we have just witnessed Bennett take his first pass at changing the status quo in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, because he is a red-hot believer that the Jewish temple, they are living now in the era of the third Jewish temple, and he is ready for the Jewish temple to rise again in Jerusalem. There is also more information to share on this, of what's going on in the background behind the curtains on this. This is a huge development this week. There is palace intrigue that's happening in the Israeli government right now, and between the nations in the Middle East, and between Israel and the governments of the world. And there are people in Israeli government who are now put in place that could help bring in the last days prophecies around Israel and its temple. So watch for our next Watch and Pray live stream this coming Sunday evening as we share more signs of the last days prophecies. Make sure you're subscribed to and following this channel, and that you click the bell to get all notifications for our live streams. It's happening. Events and conditions are happening now that are warning signs, pointing to the nearing fulfillment of the last days prophecies at the end of this age, revealing it's time to prepare now for the nearing appearance of Jesus Christ for his church by being born again spiritually into the kingdom of God, as Jesus said we must in John chapter 3, of the water and of the Spirit, to be able to enter the kingdom. And his apostles, who were authorized only by Jesus in Matthew 16 and 19, given by Jesus the keys to the kingdom, they described how to be born again in Acts chapter 2 to the Jews when Jesus started his church, in Acts chapter 10, witnessing it to the Gentiles, in Acts chapter 19, towards the end of the Acts of the Apostles, when the Apostle Paul witnessed the same thing to the nations of the world, as the Jews witnessed on the day of Pentecost in Acts the 2nd chapter. And Jesus said that the apostles' words that they preached were recorded in heaven for all the church age in Matthew 16 and 19. Remember to love the truth and be obedient to the truth. As Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Significant critical signs are happening now in Israel and world events. Keep looking up. The signs show that our redemption is drawing near.
Signs of the times are everywhere. There's a brand new feeling in the air. Keep your eyes upon the eastern sky.